Hi, Belle.
Hi, Sandy. How are you? This is nice because I get to be in the driver's seat today. And we know how much you love this process.
I love this.
By the way, I appreciate your trusting me to show some visual stuff on the screen that you and I are going to discuss. But here's the great thing about this is that all of the things that I'm going to show you are in many ways sort of Rorschach tests. You know, you may know a couple of the artists in these, but there are some where you're not going to know the artist, and you have not seen them before. I almost guarantee it. So in some ways, it just comes down to how you and I interpret things that we know nothing about. Because you and I have said before, you've actually even said it, it would be really interesting to do these without any labels on them, right? So we don't know who the person was, when they were made, how big they are, etc. Right? Just base them purely on what we're seeing. So that was the idea of today. So are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. How do I go to this next one? There you go. All right. Now, because I know slightly more about these because I know where they came from, I want you to tell me what you see. Take your time.
Oh, I will. Just to mention, Bill is dashing off to go and watch some probe landing on Mars because he is such a nerd.
It's
So I have
true.
to be quick.
No,
Um,
you can take your time. Honestly, the probe thing will wait. I can watch it in reruns. It won't be nearly as exciting, but I will do it.
okay, so in terms of what I see here, there are two things I could do. I could immediately assess the image and make assumptions about who I think it's by, what genre or style of artwork it belongs to. I could then
Do
start.
you do you think that that kind of analysis would help?
No, because I think really what you're asking me is for my opinion based on how I feel in response to it.
Yeah.
Right. So my response feeling is that I'm drawn into a layer space. I am drawn into a layer space. I think not just because I can tell or I think I can tell that it's some kind of collage or things have been built up.
Yeah.
But of course, then that creates a whole avalanche of feeling about how I enter the realm of whatever art I'm looking at. I think you're going to have to give a bit more because otherwise, I don't think
Okay.
they're going to be that
Do,
interested
do,
to listen to me talking about how I feel.
Sure. Okay, I guess my question is, if you looked at something like this, and you're right, there are a lot of layers to it, right? That it's built up over time, that certain things are broken down. I mean, you can see in the upper center there, it literally is like layer caked. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Um, when looking at, I mean, because there's a lot of work that was made in the mid 20th centuries, especially where there isn't a whole lot to grab you, right? You know what I mean? Like there isn't necessarily an obvious place for your eyes to go first, and that it comes down to where you're. For me, maybe it's the little Nate in the middle, right? You know what I'm saying? Like the little writing, right? Because maybe words are a thing for me, or you try to read what does this do you and something operate in there. You know what I mean? Like that I would try to interpret it from a textual view. um,
But is that because you're relying on the instructions given to you
Well,
by the artist?
that's my question, right? I mean, are those instructions, or are those just, who knows why they're there? You know what I
No,
mean?
the way
Um,
you're speaking about it makes me immediately think that with you, what you're doing is you're looking at something and you're expecting to be told. And actually, that's really, really interesting when we look at any kind of abstract art, isn't it? That very often we're not being told anything that we can formally recognize. And that's the nature of abstraction, taking us beyond really the recognizable. And
yeah.
I wonder about I wonder about your reaction where time is really spent trying to pick it apart.
Well, especially in a piece like this that literally is parts of other things, right? I mean, it quite literally is, let's take 50 different things and have them all as one piece, and it's not even a whole version of anything. It's partial versions of 50 things, you know?
But hang on, it is a whole version in and of itself.
Yeah.
So we can choose to look at this. I mean, I gave myself two distinct options earlier, which is I can look at it academically and I can analyze it, or I can respond to it emotionally. And those two things, by the way, also can marry up and be very much part of the same language.
Certainly intertwined, yeah.
Yeah, but in looking at any image such as this, I think there is also a split, perhaps, in how different people have the capacity for viewing. My capacity for viewing is taking a whole view, starting from the whole at the beginning, and then perhaps moving into exploring detail or specific.
Sure.
Whereas with you, what I think happens is that you go for detail like a jugular straight away.
Yes, but in this case, not always, but certainly in more figurative traditional stuff, I take it all in. With something like this, where there isn't an obvious interpretation of what's going on here, it's not a woman laying on a bed like the Manet that we looked at, or that kind of thing, right? It's not, there isn't an obvious thing that this is trying to do or say. Therefore, it really comes down to, it ends up, I feel like work like this a lot of times becomes a mirror to what I want it to be, or how I'm feeling in the moment that I'm looking at it. You know what I mean? And sometimes I wonder whether pieces that are this abstract are actually saying anything unto themselves, or really, as I said in the beginning, they're just like a Rorschach test of what I want to see in them. You know?
I mean, this is an interesting thing to start with, because I do think actually this is pretty impenetrable.
Yes.
I think a lot of people, and I'm not trying to deflect what I think, but I do think a lot of people would not wish to engage with this.
Yes. Would you not wish to engage with it?
Well, of course I would wish to engage with it. That doesn't make me smarter or better. It just means
No,
that
no.
this is the kind of thing that I enjoy, because to me this is something that I said right at the beginning when you asked for my immediate response. It's something I kind of enter.
I'm going backwards. There we go.
You're kind of blowing your cover there, Bill.
I know. I did it accidentally.
So I mean, being able to access work like this,
yeah,
again, is to do with, you know, maybe somebody has been educated in a way that means they understand the language, the vernacular of this kind of work.
Right. Okay.
Well, collage or abstract expressionism.
Yeah.
Or
I'm gonna go ahead. Sorry, finish with that.
Or it could be that simply somebody finds something, as you say, the response to the Rorschach kind of testing, where there's an immediate, quite visceral, experiential reckoning or response.
Yeah. I'll tell you, you know, you see like 2/3 of the way down the left side, there's almost that like little like green teal patch in there. Like there's something about that little patch that I really like. I think it's because it's in such contrast to the more earthy tones of the rest of it, you know. It's the only thing on the cool side of the spectrum that's going on in this.
I'm not sure, because you could look at this again. This is somebody is a kind of a color enthusiast. That is actually not the only counterpoint of color. You know, there are many aspects of this particular collage where the artist very cleverly has actually inserted color families and harmonies, contrasts, so that our eye is balanced. So much as we may think that many people wouldn't want to engage with it, nonetheless, when you do, there isn't a sense of kind of like the visual boredom that one might find if the palette is really limited. This is an expansive color palette.
Yeah.
And where you're identifying that portion, there are actually smaller marks around, well, all over in fact, but also mainly the top space in that top right, where we have these kind of aqua details.
Sorry, keeps. You know what's interesting about it is that I want a big print of this on my wall at home for some reason. I don't know why. I really like this one.
I do wonder what the value is in either of us saying what we like.
Well, I totally. Well, or is that really ultimately the only value, at least on an individual level?
It is, but not necessarily for the purposes of discussion. I mean, this is, again, thinking about being a teacher, teaching people so that they feel confident to have an opinion. Those opinions are vital. But really, in the kind of mainline conversations that we may all have about art, yes, opinion is so important because it allows us to feel safe in how we feel about something. But at the same time, I think having a conversation about visual art needs to kind of transcend opinion often.
Transcend opinion. Wait, how do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, I can say I like this. You've just said you like it. You want a big print of it on your wall.
Yep.
Now, you and I are friends and we can talk about that. And I respect what you're saying and you would listen to me and what I say. But in terms of then others listening to our conversation, people who like you like to know what you like. But for people who don't know us, listening to a conversation about art, even if they're not expecting there to be a highly academic analysis of this particular piece, nonetheless, I think they want us to go beyond opinion, because opinion, again, is closing something down. And we've talked about this in slightly different ways before, where we kind of bottom out on artwork by claiming it to be this one way because I see it this one way.
Yeah.
Whereas I think it's always very useful to acknowledge one's own opinion and to speak it to friends, but also to accept that there's a transcendable sense of visual art, which is more kind of universal. Like, what is this? Why is it?
Yeah, in some ways, it's almost like quantum. It's like where it's in superimposition. It's neither yes or no. It's both until a single person decides that they like it or don't like it. In which case, that the field collapses, as they say in quantum mechanics, into one idea. Yeah.
But also that we accept that even if you and I have an opinion right now today, the opinion isn't fixed.
Sure. And opinions of society change over time. What people liked in 1930 versus 1950 versus 1970.
I think there were many people in 1950 who rallied against this, by the way.
Yes. Yeah. There's people now who still do.
I think that is relevant, and again, I encounter this a lot where I want to introduce abstract painters, for example, and I realize that not everybody wants, as we're saying, not everybody wants to engage with it. It doesn't look like something. It doesn't mean anything because it doesn't look like the real object. And that's why it's interesting that you and I primarily are photographers. You're a professional photographer.
From time to time.
I'm just a pretend photographer. But, we're working in a medium that does record a more actual sense, arguably.
More objective, yes.
And really what this does is it takes us beyond recognition.
Yeah.
Lots of people would think this is just a giant mess. And likewise, if we were walking in the city together and we passed this, on the side of a wall on a building, are we gonna scrutinize this and pick it as high art? I
don't know.
It's very tricky.
All right, we're gonna move on because we'll come back.
Because you want to watch the Mars probe?
No. I'm just saying there's a number of slides that I want, but each individual one of these means sort of less than the overall conversation that we're having. So we're having great conversation. So this is exactly what I want. Do you happen to know this work? Do you have an idea of who made this one?
Maybe.
Okay. if it is the person who you think made it, do you like that person's work in general?
Not always.
Yes. Okay. I completely agree with exactly that statement.
By the way,
There,
are you going to share with anybody watching
yes.
who these
At
are?
the end, I will tell you who made all of these.
Fine. Okay.
Yep. I mean, this kind of stuff that is in many ways even more minimal, because at least the first one had color and shape. You know what I mean? There was a lot going on there, if not chaos. This is very two-toned, you know what I mean? Like there's texture to the surface of it, but it doesn't give you all that much. You know what I mean?
I don't know, but again, if we're talking about a human response to something,
yeah.
You and I are viewing this on a screen,
Sure.
an ocean apart from each other.
Yeah.
We could go and see work like this, or indeed this.
Sure. If you come visit me,
be met with a feeling.
Yes.
We might get an incredible sense of something in our memory from this.
Yep.
That is not actually about the materiality of the piece at all. And I think perhaps artists rely on this
Being in person.
if they care about it. That there's an infinite resource in other people's memory to allow the license of that image in people's minds, so that we walk about and we see things and we access them, usually because we identify with them.
Sure. Yeah. It's stuff too that involves any sort of newsprint, because it sort of dates it to a particular time and place a lot of times.
Mm.
I always like that. It's one thing that I like about this artist, that a lot of the materials that get used end up feeling very of an era, and that in itself, it's one of those things, like when you look at like the Saul Leiter photographs like we talked about before, and you see all the cars in them and you think, oh, look how cool all those old cars were. Well, sure they were, but if you took a picture today and you go 50 years in the future, probably people will look back and be like, oh, look at those old 2011 cars that, had a certain look and feel to them.
Are you
we don't realize it because we're
behind
today.
everybody else? Bill, you do know it's 2021, right?
Oh, sorry, 2021. That's right. Yes. I got out of my time machine. 2021, you're right. You see what I'm saying, though? That in some ways, age gives things, sometimes age gives meaning to things just because you know where it's set in a timeline.
Yeah, but in terms of this image, does everybody know what timeline it fits within? Again, this is an enormous privilege, right? I am so aware of my good fortune and my incredible privilege that I have been engaged with and have had access to a wider education of basically Western art.
Sure.
But not everybody has that. And not everybody wants to have that. And so I wonder again about, on a different day, in a different time, in a different place, if I was that person over there, would I see this and feel the same as I do now? No, of course.
There's a lot of work at MoMA that I look at that I think, if I didn't know what I know about art and why a certain thing is important because of, some intellectual conversation or decisions that were made in materials, or this is a deviation from where everyone else was going, and that's what makes it interesting. I mean, that goes for music, that goes for, all kinds of things, right? It's like, what made it different than what was going on at the time, or why it was new, is a lot of what makes it special. Not that it was inherently special. It only is special because of where it was.
Yes, but also there's an incredible folly in that, isn't there? Which is again to do with this notion that we close things down. We don't keep them as availably open.
So you think we should interpret, say this piece was made in 1952. I don't know exactly what the date was, but let's say it was 1952, and we interpret it now 70 years later. do you think that we should have a completely different interpretation of it because it's 70 years later? Or should we end up with the same interpretation that the people who saw it 70 years ago have?
I'm very interested in this should, Bill.
Yes, should is it's the only word I have that can, you know. Do you think that people do have a different interpretation of it 70 years later? There you go. There's a better way of putting it.
No, and truthfully, I don't, because I actually think that we are still beholden to modern, postmodern notions in art.
Yeah.
I think that the art language that we speak, use, see now is still too close historically with these titans, really, of Western art from the 20th century. I mean, the 20th century is, as you know, the most extraordinary period of art making. I mean, it's like the maverick century. You know, we think we're so grand and fancy now in the 21st century with all our technology, but my goodness, this is groundbreaking. We think about how the 20th century brought us up and past European modernism through the channels of really, I guess, what ultimately would have been a very kind of European sensibility and was transplanted, indeed, transatlantically from a lot of people who came over from especially Germany.
Sure. In some ways, in the description that you're giving, which I think is true, it's two things I want to say about this. One, yes, absolutely, especially post World War II, where Europe and Asia are just literally rubble, you know, for the most part. And then you have the United States, which became this economic and industrial powerhouse, became the center of the world to a large extent after World War II. And so the sort of the eyes of the art world actually moved there as well.
No, don't discount the fact that you're an American saying all of this, of course.
Oh, well, no, let me say the second part, which is, I remember a few years ago, I think it was the Emir of Qatar gave his, I think it's his daughter or daughter-in-law, some member of his family runs the museum there, and he gave her some crazy budget, like $1 billion a year to buy art. Mm-hmm. And she went and she bought one of the Cezanne card players paintings and paid, you know, some exorbitant amount of money, $300 million or whatever the hell it was, to buy this painting. And there were all these people, all these sort of, you know, pro-Western people who were just like, how dare this, you know, Arab country come and buy this piece of art and bring it to whatever, bring it to Qatar, and, you know, this should stay in Western museums, whatever, you know, the crazy reactionary view was with some of the things I read. And I always find that funny because ultimately, you know, the only reason the Met exists is because a bunch of rich Americans went to Europe and bought a bunch of stuff from European people at the turn of the century and brought it here, you know.
This conversation is a very, very tricky conversation for us to have. And I think on a channel, my humble little YouTube channel,
yeah,
you know, I would love to talk about provenance and ownership of art.
Yeah.
But it's such a vast subject. It's also a very, very difficult subject.
I mean, personally, I'm completely agnostic. I mean nothing by this. All I'm saying is that the reason why I think America did become the center of the art world for a short amount of time, because it was the center of the world in general for a short amount of time. Like, it became the important place. And now it's probably, I don't know, you know, Shanghai or somewhere that is like, you know, where the really exciting stuff is happening and things are moving forward. It's certainly not New York anymore, probably.
Well,
you know?
But also let's look at that for a second. There's no reason why in the middle of the 20th century there weren't also really, really exciting things happening in Shanghai. There's also no reason why, I know you're not saying that, but I think it's right to mention it, that sometimes the place that speaks the loudest about itself obviously causes the most commotion.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
And you know, I'm not in any kind of denial about the fact that I actually genuinely do love American art from the middle of the 20th century. You know, to me, it's like the lifeblood of painting. is abstract expressionism and the color field artists. And that for me has been so powerfully influential and inspirational in my own art, my own photographic practice even. But I do think that there is a bigger issue that we would have to be very brave to tackle about where any of this comes from and where any of this has landed up.
Well, I mean, how much of what makes a certain art important has to comes with, what the media says about it, and what I mean, who the media decides to put their flashlight on. I mean, that's a huge part of any of this.
We could look at how peddling my own wares here a little bit, but we could look at how there's been an underrepresentation of, let's say, women
absolutely
in art, and that we've got really quite extraordinary female painters, abstract expressionist painters, who are known and are celebrated. But my God, what a lot of effort it's taken to get them there.
Sure.
If
and that's women who are making Western art in the Western world. I mean,
exactly.
If you go to Africa or you look at South America, even, you know what I mean? How many artists there are working who never get noticed for reasons that are out of their control.
I wonder with work like this is kind of coming up to the point very slowly though. You're talking a little bit about this sense of time in work, the availability of time to a viewer, and how time impacts how we might see or read something.
Sure.
I think it's also right to say that certain art is genderless, and in its formlessness, or in its, in fact, refinement, that we actually find an emptiness into which we can become ourselves.
A unity, or a where gender doesn't matter, or gender becomes inclusive.
Where nothing matters.
Yeah. Do you think that is? Do you think that's a common view, or do you think that's your view?
I think that's my view, because I also, of course, know the deep misogyny of a lot of the male artists that we may be encountering in this presentation.
Yep. Yeah. All right, we're going to go to the next one, because the next one is also interesting. Do you know this artist?
No.
Okay. Now, obviously, there's a lot of color going on here. Obviously, this is a much more. It's funny. I have a certain amount of art education. I am certainly somewhat well read in certain aspects of art. I am in no way some sort of master or doctor of art history, right? I know more than your average bear, but I'm certainly no expert. I would use the word messy to describe this painting. And I'm sure there's art experts out there who would yell at me for saying that. But if we're going on this from a,
does messy have a relationship ever to deliberate?
Things can be deliberately messy.
Okay.
I don't know. Well, here's the distinction. I don't know that I can make a distinction between deliberately messy and messy. And if I can't make that distinction, does that distinction matter?
Well, how did you distinguish in the very first image you showed?
Yep.
Something that wasn't just a ragtag wall down an alley in Brooklyn.
Right.
How did you distinguish it? How did you identify it?
I don't know. Strangely enough, this one feels more chaotic than the first to me.
But this raises really interesting questions about how we do, in fact, identify what art even is.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm not trying to be obvious or
No, this is exactly where I want this conversation to go. So continue.
Oh, am I meeting your criteria, Bill, now?
Well,
Or
not criteria. I just like, this is where I was hoping it would go. So go ahead.
so you've
Yeah.
manipulated me into saying exactly what you wanted?
No, I'm the teacher becomes the student for today. No, seriously. I mean, so when you look at this one, what are you thinking? Not necessarily specifically about this, but where did it make you want to go?
I think that always a useful exercise for anybody to do is to chuck a whole heap of adjectives at something and mix them up together and see what impression it gives in another layer of one's understanding. So we look at this, we appreciate it in its physical, visual form. We
Yep.
might get a sense of materiality. We automatically respond, as we've already said, with memory and experience. And then we can dissect it through that avalanche of adjectives, and we can start to say things like, is there a parity between something that is messy but something that is also deliberate? Is there a dialogue somehow between something that appears to be chaotic and yet is also incredibly self-contained? And where those disconnects happen, to me, is also where lots of magic happens in terms of my access to something.
Yep.
It's where I find thrilling things about visual art. It might sound obscure, but you immediately said messy, and I
Yeah.
immediately said deliberate. And actually, the thrill of this, beyond the purely visual, it's then thinking, my God, is something messy and deliberate? Can they exist simultaneously? Is there a gap in space and time somehow through this painting that is like a portal into nothing? So in actual fact, there's nothing to be said about it other than simply experiencing it.
So what adjectives would you throw at this?
Well, this is where I think we would make a mistake. I actually don't think necessarily you or I should throw adjectives at this, but I think we should suggest that that is what may be something people would like to do.
Sure.
I don't want to put my words in your mouth.
I mean, I can hear what you have to say without it changing my opinion of what I think of it.
Okay, of course. But at the same
I,
time, that's yet another, maybe very subtle layer of direction, isn't it?
I mean,
We want to have something to jostle against. And actually, perhaps
sure.
okay to assert those things within oneself, but that if I listen to you giving me all your words, if I listen to even the artist giving me all their words, then I wonder if it changes I wonder if it changes the language entirely. And again, this is maybe then another question that comes up is like, who wants us to see? The big question, what is art? Blah, blah, blah. But
Yeah.
also, who wants us to see? Does somebody somewhere have a fixed idea about what we ought to see? And indeed, who do we think we are when we assert our own privilege and interpretation? Um,
Well,
all
I
of
mean,
things, there's no value judgment in this, actually.
well, I think that's the thing. I mean, you were saying that, how do we know whether something is art, the definition of art? But even one step further than that is, even if we agree that all of these things we are seeing, if they cause our brain to have some reaction to them, you could say on some simplistic level, we are getting some artistic value out of them.
What
Knowing,
do you mean artistic value?
um, if it's changing our brain in some way, if someone makes something that when we experience it changes the way our brain is firing at any particular time, you could say that that's doing its job, right? It's communicating something to us. I mean, like whether this painting is worth $30 million or found in the trash outside is based upon the market is somewhat irrelevant, right? It comes down to how it makes any one of us feel. I mean, you like to say that, you don't want to collapse that into an opinion. I understand that. But like ultimately for a single person, isn't that okay for that to collapse to an opinion for them?
Yeah, but also, culture does that for us all the time, doesn't it? Culture is always compartmentalizing.
Sure. And certainly in the world as it is today, the people manipulating that culture for, economic gain or whatever it is, like, it's we have the daughter of, I saw a thing the other day that Madonna's daughter is now the spokesperson for some big fashion brand or whatever it is. And she's a perfectly ordinary looking person, other than the fact that she's Madonna's daughter and probably has, 2 million Instagram followers. Like it is that brand manipulating culture in that case in order to further themselves. So I mean, that kind of stuff happens all the time. I guess what I'm saying is I don't trust culture to make those decisions, because I think you can get railroaded by culture into talking about people telling you what to think. I mean, we're constantly bombarded by people telling us what we're supposed to think about something.
Okay, so then that really brings us back to the point, which is that if you tell me what you think, are you telling me what to think? And in your
I
case,
would say no
yes,
to that
highly
question.
likely you are telling me what to think, Bill. Let's face facts. But really, genuinely, you're not.
No.
I'm not telling you what to think, but there is a real danger of this happening. Anybody who's ever been on a gallery tour will realize that very often, even the best tour guides are telling you what to think.
Of course.
That's
I think
why.
a lot of people are going on that tour in order to get that answer. They want to be told what to think.
Mm-hmm.
You don't think that's true?
Mm-hmm.
So, I
But
mean,
I think there's also a problem with us talking in this way about it, because it makes it seem like we are in actual fact being those elitist scumbags. Because aren't we saying then, oh, well, aren't we great because we don't need to be told what to think? We are completely confident in how we think. There's so many layers
I,
to
I don't
this.
know that I agree with that, but go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, there's just so many layers to this conversation, and there's so many ways that
Absolutely.
what is said could be misinterpreted.
Sure. I
Right.
mean, but just because you have an interpretation of, say, this painting, you could be wrong. Maybe the person who made it had something completely different they were trying to say, or maybe where it sits in the culture could be completely different. But why does that make your view of it invalid, minus all that other information?
Oh, no. What I mean is that, my view is completely valid, but who is my view valid to? My view is valid to me because I think it.
Sure. Yeah.
And up to a point, yes, I am compartmentalized in a role, which is as a teacher, for example. And therefore, sometimes I am required to have an opinion that I express so that other people can see a model of, I guess, how to articulate an opinion. But what I must always be very careful about is that I'm not teaching my opinion.
No, I understand that, but in some ways, I feel like you're trying to say the same thing twice, though. You're saying we are privileged in the sense that we are saying that we don't need culture to tell us what this means. But then you also said that we are privileged because we have all that education, which allows us to have a language with to interpret any of this stuff.
Mhm.
So is there any way to come at art and not be privileged for you and I?
Oh, Bill, there's one of these amazing classic Bill moments where you've said something so incredibly transportingly golden and insightful,
I don't
in
know.
my opinion.
I don't know. I find that I think sometimes you get, not you, one does get lost in sort of meta interpretation when what's going on in your head when looking at some piece of art, whatever it is, whoever you are, from wherever you are, despite your education level or your gender or your background or whatever it is, you can interpret it based upon your experiences and get something out of it that might be completely irrelevant to the other 8 billion people on Earth, and that's okay. And, you know, and I like that idea, you know.
Well, it's why we all have different pictures on our walls, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I'm just trying to remember the name of the little girl who made paintings that her parents then flogged for millions of dollars.
Yeah, we discussed her on Taking Pictures a million years ago. Yeah. I mean, but that's marketing. Is that has nothing to do with art? That's business, right?
I
Or
don't know.
are those
There was some kind of
those interactive?
anecdotal story about it, which was that the parents, yes, master manipulators and marketers, but actually, when we look at painting and we look at the quality of color and composition and so on, that those visual elements are available to anybody looking, aren't they? And so the dinner table, above which on the wall the parents had hung this vast canvas that the little girl had smeared her paint upon.
Yep.
Parents actually orchestrated a bidding war for that painting.
Yeah.
Uh, and the point about this is that I think a lot of the people who were bidding in this bidding war for that painting and for others then like it later uh, were exactly the kind of people that are incredibly privileged and so-called educated. And the big reveal moment when they said, well, actually, it was little so and so who actually created this. Did anyone steal themselves? Did anyone feel angry at being
Cheated.
cheated? But isn't that interesting? Because actually, are they being cheated? Who
I
gets
don't
to
know.
be an artist?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this dovetails back into everything we're actually saying, which is we all have our own opinions. We all can feel things about painting. We should
Yep.
be allowed to respond in whatever way we, not just
Yes.
do, but actually in whatever way we do without any choice in it at all.
Yes. But I think that all of those feelings are, if anything, I think that having too much information. Okay, two things. One, I think having too much information often corrupts how we want to naturally view something. I think that is often true. I also think it's true that God, I don't know how to say this. Um, I think knowing too much often corrupts. I think that it's okay for us to like what we like, and I don't think that there's. I think that when you go and you have work, especially the work that you're talking about, anything that happened after, say, 1930 or something, or even go before that, you can go back to, Man Ray photographs or whatever it is. It's just like, it's dust on the ground. Why is that important? And it's like, somebody could discuss with you why that's important, but it's really just dust on the ground, and you can still like it even though it's just a picture of dust on the ground. I think when you get into stuff that is really abstract like this, it is much more difficult, per that young girl who painted those paintings that people loved or were told they need to love and paid millions of dollars for. I think that once you get away from representational art, it is much more difficult for your average person to make an objective decision about the quality of that. Somebody can look at a Caravaggio or a Rembrandt or even an early-ish Picasso and say, there's great skill in that in some way, and I understand that it's valuable, maybe because look how skilled that person was painting that or sculpting that or whatever it is, and you can have some intrinsic value to their level of skill of, wow, that really looks like a Madonna with child, it's the Pietà or something, right? Um, but when you get into this stuff, like the world just kind of explodes in every direction, and you really, you're really kind of unmoored, And I think if anything, all of that information that we get from the people giving the tours or books we read or classes we give or the things that you and I say, if anything, only sort of give a handrail to people looking at it so they feel like they have something to know that they're moving against, you know what I mean, within their own opinions.
Well,
Because
that's
I
what
think
I
it's
was
really
saying
difficult.
earlier. That's what I was saying
What's
earlier
that?
about jostling. We like to
Yeah.
have something to jostle against, don't we? We like to feel that we're not just in a giant empty space.
Well, I think you have to have some sort of reference, or else, you could go 100,000 miles an hour in space and you have no idea you're going that fast because you have no reference to, you're not actually passing anything, you know.
Doesn't mean you're not going
Um,
fast, though, does it?
well, you are going fast in relation to things that are so far away that you can't, we're going to talk about relativity now. That's very complicated.
Well, I also
Okay.
like directing the conversation so we remember that you are watching a probe landing on Mars
I
in
know.
12 minutes.
Okay. So I have other slides, but I'm going to skip the next two. We're going to go to the last three in a minute because I wanted to talk to you about them because I really like them, but they're not part of this discussion. I'm going to let you win on what's going on with these three slides right now. Okay, so everyone who knows this. Okay, this is a de Kooning painting from 1977. It sold for $32 million a couple of years ago. I really like de Kooning. A lot of early, like mid de Kooning stuff, I think is absolutely glorious. This painting doesn't do all that much for me. Is it because I don't know enough about it? I don't know. But I can, but if I don't know anything about it, I would look at this and as you said in the beginning, walk by the one on the wall, right? Or whatever it is. This is Robert Rauschenberg, of course. I'm sure that's where you were going with your thought of it, because you're a smart little cookie. And Rauschenberg, I also have very mixed feelings about. I like some of those combines, the like three-dimensionality to it. But then some of this stuff that's like super minimal goes too minimal for me, and I don't really get anything out of it. Why are you making a face?
I'm not. I just,
Okay.
it's interesting now we come to the end of it and we're given the names.
Yep.
And I wonder if people watching are suddenly now responding anew, to find the name in our memory bank.
And then it means something new to them.
Again, the sense of identifying.
Yeah.
Oh, once I was in MoMA and I saw this. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny? The word is not the thing.
No, it's not.
We do it all.
Well, that's especially true of this one. Okay, so I'm very impressed by you right now. Like really, really impressed by you right now. You are. No, I'm dead serious. You nailed this twice during our conversation.
Don't know what you mean, Bill.
This piece has no artist. This piece was made by hundreds of people. It is actually an ad in the subway that was torn through 27,000 times and overlaid and ripped off and overlaid and ripped off. And it had been ripped off because they hadn't put a new one on top. And I absolutely loved it. And I took a picture of it. So no one made any of the decisions in this piece of art. And yet I still see stuff in here and actually like it, even though it really isn't anything and no one was trying to say anything with it.
Well, testament to...
You could claim that I am the artist.
Well, the strange curve of chance here is that you are the artist, Bill.
Yeah, right. But I think that if you stuck this in a pile of mid-century collages and things, I don't know that it would get passed by.
It would be lauded over and feted, and it would be hanging somewhere special. This is the point of everything we say, isn't it? But I still do think that there is an artist, and I know that artist. And it's very clever, the way it's composed and the way
it's actually really nice, isn't it?
You balance the color. Now, the color has happened. You're now telling me accidentally.
Yep.
Hmm?
Yep.
But you chose it
this way. This is shot on my iPhone, I think.
But you chose it this way. You chose it.
I did. I chose it and I pointed my camera at it and I shot it. You know, but this, I feel like this is my problem with a lot of actual, when I say actual, I don't actually mean that this isn't art. I just mean that like art that people do put on walls of museums is that sometimes I as much as I love a lot of that work, I can't make the distinction between that work and something that happened purely by chance, which is kind of
And
what this is until I saw it.
okay, and also, by the way, you saying that if we put this in amongst lots of other Collage,
Yeah.
Lee Krasner, Clifford Still, you know, anything, it could be even John's in some way or another.
Yeah.
I mean, I was searching for those names. I was Rolodexing, thinking, where is this from? I didn't nail it. I do think you're the artist, but I think it now. So I can see that there's choice in it because you chose this. But when you put the slide up on the screen, I was immediately going to my knowledge bank.
Yeah, trying to compare it to other things and kind of put it in a
Looking
bucket.
through everything that I could possibly identify with.
Oh, Sandy, I took this and I actually put it in Google Images to see if I can match it to something because I found it on my phone and go, I think this is one of those ones from the subway, but I can't be sure that it's not a painting that actually exists. And I stuck it into Google and it came up with 0 matches for it. So it took, and then I looked up where I took it and I took it up at 15th Street Prospect Park stop up the street from here. And there's just something about that though that I really love. Okay, so can I show you 2 other things before we finish up here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. By the way, this is another one that was on the wall in the subway, which I actually kind of like too, with the baby in it and stuff.
I think you have a whole new career.
Oh, I have a whole series of these. I don't know what the heck I could do with them, but here's a dirt painting by Rauschenberg. But here's the thing. Okay, this is an inset of a larger piece, and it is just little tiny chunks of magazines ripped out. Do you know who this is already? Do you seem like you know who it is?
No?
Okay. The thing that I love about this, and this is the kind of stuff, this is where I eat. This is the thing that I like absolutely love about this kind of collage modern art, is people who do stuff like this. This is a chunk of a Vic Muniz painting, which actually is that.
Yeah.
Made up of magazines. You can see it's actually the little fruit bowl down by her left hand is like the woman in the orange jumpsuit. But like people who take materials and stuff that's literally being tossed away. And obviously in this particular series, he's just recreating old paintings. There's a really great one of, what's the floor sander people, you know what I'm saying? The floor finisher, you know I'm talking about, that painting of the guys on the floor cleaning scraping the floor. I'll find it. But he did and he put them together and then he shot them and then they're like 8 by 10 feet on the wall. So you like step back from them and you're like, oh, it's that famous Manet painting. But then you get up close and it's just little tiny chunks of stuff from magazines. And just like, I love that kind of stuff. It just makes me really happy. Another example of that would be my friend Ian Wright, who lives in London, did this album cover for TI that is just receipts and paperwork and stuff that he turned into the album cover. And like, this kind of stuff just makes me, I don't know. I think it's because you're doing stuff like making collage, but at the same time there's so much skill involved in actually doing it well enough to create something that on the macro becomes something more than just the pieces of stuff in the micro. Does that make sense?
Mm.
Doesn't do anything for you, huh?
No.
Does the Vic Muniz do anything for you?
No.
Do you like that original painting?
That again, this is why it's kind of pointless anybody ever expressing their opinion. You and I could say, oh, I like it. Well, I don't.
Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of thing that makes me go, whoo.
I appreciate its skill and its cleverness.
Yeah. Anyway, there's a whole series of these, and I think they're all pretty cool. He did Caravaggio, he does Van Gogh, he does all kinds of people like this. He did a whole series of them. He's also got a really good one where he made you know, the Caravaggio of the Medusa and the round one that's in Florence. He made it out of spaghetti. Is the hair? It's just it's a shot of a plate from face down, and it's spaghetti and all the rest of it to make a version of it. Minas is like so cool, and from Brazil. So, although he lives in Brooklyn, I've always wanted to meet him, and he never replies to my emails, and it's very sad.
Oh.
Although I met somebody recently who was from his hometown, and I said, "You don't happen to know Vic Muniz, do you?" And he said, "Yeah, I do actually. My wife's friends with him. Here's his mobile number." And I'm like, I'm not going to cold call Vic Muniz. So I've had this phone number for 3 years, and I've been too scared to actually call it. All right. So do you think we had any interesting conversations today?
No, none. What do you think, Belle?
I think that when you and I think that it is interesting when you and I have a topic like we've had for the few weeks before this that you have brought up, and we're looking on sort of a more myopic scale of some sort of either vertical or horizontal. But I also think sometimes I think the differences of opinions that you and I have about things on a more pulled back scale are also really interesting. And that's kind of where I wanted to go today. And I think we totally went there. I thought it was really fun.
Well, everybody watching, next week normal service will resume.
Oh, I see how it is.
Well, Belle, it's always a pleasure, mostly a pleasure. And yeah, thank you. Very interesting for me, totally outside my comfort zone to not have any purchase on, as we spoke before, you know, I felt quite apprehensive not knowing what I was going to speak about. I like to be prepared and feel as if I know, and isn't that interesting in light of everything we've just said?
Yeah. I think that, yeah, it is actually interesting considering that in so many other ways you don't want to know.
Mm.
It's interesting twists of our psychologies, isn't it?
Indeed. And on that note,
We'll talk to you next week.
bye.
Bye.